The Myers-Briggs type indicator is a personality typology that has taken the world by storm. No matter where you look, you'll undoubtedly see people proudly proclaiming that they are an ISFJ, ENTP, ENTJ, INTP, thousands upon thousands of INFPs, and maybe a few INFJs for good measure. And to this obsession, I'm absolutely no different. Ever since I've first taken the infamous personality test that is 16 personalities, I've been hooked. And I mean, you only need to look at the homepage to understand why. This test boasts about its ability to understand you, to give an accurate description of who you are and why you do the things you do. For people who feel misunderstood, finally having a test that can not only tell you who you are, but why you are who you are, can be incredibly comforting and validating. That's why I have an incredibly soft spot for MBTI. It provides a framework in which you can not only understand yourself, but also the people around you, in incredibly simple terms. Also, it's just fun to scroll through personality database and argue over whether Doja Cat is an ENFP or ESFP. All this to say, I'm not a pretentious boomer who doesn't want anyone to have fun. I absolutely love MBTI. I know way more about this shit than I care to admit because I'm legitimately obsessed. However, it is precisely this obsession that has led me to the conclusion that MBTI, it actually kinda sucks. But before I can get into the nitty-gritty, I need to clarify what exactly MBTI is, and of course, what I will be referencing in this video. The simple definition of MBTI is that it is a system with 16 different personality types, in which each personality type has its own 4-letter code corresponding to how you score on 4 different dichotomies, which are extroversion or introversion, intuition or sensing, thinking or feeling, and judging or perceiving. Extroverted people are typed as being energized by others and enjoy going to social events, whereas introverted people are energized by being alone and prefer to stay in, opting out of social events when social battery is low. Now, of course, extroversion and introversion have found their way into everyday language, and you'll be hard-pressed to find anybody who doesn't at least have a baseline understanding of these terms. However, the next dichotomy seems a bit more uncertain, at least to me, as every single person who explains this dichotomy seems to have a different definition of what it actually means. But we'll get more to this point later. These are, of course, the traits of intuition and sensing. Now, the definition I will be using of intuition in this video are that these are people who are more focused on possibilities, what could be, and thinking outside the box, versus sensing, in which sensors are realistic, down-to-earth people who apply practical knowledge to everyday problems. Thinking and feeling are just what they sound like, with people who are thinkers being more logical, objective, and thinking with their head, whereas feelers are people who have strong moral values, are typed as being more sensitive, and think with their heart. Finally, judges are typically people who are organized, like being prepared, and prefer to stick to plans, whereas perceivers are people who prefer to act spontaneously, keep their options open, and go with the flow. And of course, how someone scores on each of these 4 dichotomies determines what type they are. For example, if someone scores as extroverted, sensing, thinking, and perceiving, their type will be ESTP, whereas someone who scores as introverted, intuitive, feeling, and judging will be INFJ. Now, this is where we run into our first problem, because the 4-letter model is the model in which the majority of people engage with MBTI. I mean, ask anyone you know if they've heard of MBTI, and the vast majority of people who have will have heard of it through 16 personalities. However, ask any nerd like me if they've heard of MBTI, and chances are you'll get an entire essay on how, why yes, I know about MBTI, but I hope you're talking about the cognitive function model, because unlike 16 personalities, the cognitive function model is actually legit. So, what is the cognitive function model? The cognitive function model follows the same basic premise as the 4-letter model in that a person can follow one of the 16 personality types based on their traits. However, whereas the 4-letter model is based on 8 different traits, with each type containing 4 traits, the cognitive function model is only based on 4 traits: sensing, intuition, thinking, and feeling. However, extroversion and introversion still play a large role in the cognitive function model, as whether someone is introverted or extroverted determines where their energy is directed, whether it be toward the external world for extroverts or toward the inner world for introverts. This is known as one's general attitude type. Therefore, if someone is extroverted and their dominant function is feeling, their dominant personality type will be extroverted feeling. This is the same for all traits in that someone can either have a dominant trait of thinking, feeling, sensing, or intuition, known as their functional type, and their dominant way of directing energy can either be extroverted or introverted, leading to 8 different possibilities. Extroverted thinkers are typed as being very logical and glean their knowledge from outside sources. Out of every type, dominant extroverted thinkers value tangible data in their decisions decision making and come across as very objective in their thought processes. On the other hand, introverted thinkers are also very logical, but they are more focused on their inward thought processes and coming up with logical explanations based on their own internal framework. Therefore, unlike extroverted thinkers, an introverted thinker's logic is based on what seems logical to them personally, as opposed to tangible data. This makes introverted thinkers more flexible in their pursuit of knowledge, yet they may also be more likely to fall into logical fallacies due to their internal framework not necessarily lining up with empirical evidence. It's just my hypothesis that many of the people in the "I'm going to do my own research" crowd, despite not being qualified in the topic they're supposedly researching, align with personality types who use introverted thinking. Although this is in no way a generalization of all people who identify with these types, I only use these people as an extreme example of those who put their own logical understanding of the world on a pedestal above actual facts, whereas the rigidity of extroverted thinkers in extreme cases may make them less willing to explore new ideas, making them less innovative than introverted thinkers. Introverted thinkers in extreme cases may have a tendency to be too innovative, disregarding facts that don't align with their own personal logical framework of the world. Those who are extroverted feelers are typed as being very in tune with their outside social world and prefer to make decisions based on the morality of their social group. Above all else, they are interested in maintaining social harmony and are friendly and agreeable. On the other hand, introverted feelers are more in tune with their internal moral world and make decisions based on their own personal moral code. Because their energy isn't directed towards the outside social world, they can be difficult to get to know. Furthermore, because they are more in tune with their emotions than people of other types, they can come across as sensitive and emotional. Extroverted sensors are typed as being realistic and crave experiences that stimulate the senses. They can be seen as thrill seekers, but they also have a practical view of the world and take in the world through their 5 senses. To extroverted sensors, their view of the world is only comprised of what they can personally see, hear, touch, or experience. On the other hand, introverted sensors also base their world around sensation, but like other introverted types, sensation for introverted sensors is based upon their inner world. Introverted sensors have a reputation of being very detail-oriented, which is due to the fact that they build an internal world based upon the senses they experience. Because of this, many people type introverted sensors as being focused on the past. It's not that introverted sensors live in the past, but they do base their view of the world on sensations they have experienced in the past. Therefore, introverted sensors may have a difficult time accepting change, as new experiences provide different sensations that they don't have a baseline for in their internal world. This can be uncomfortable to those who rely on their internal world of sensations to navigate the world. Finally, people who use extroverted intuition are typed as creative people who are always looking for new possibilities. These are the people who seem to always have a new idea and are excellent brainstormers. However, this affinity towards new ideas also gives those who use extroverted intuition the reputation of being unable to finish a project, as just as they begin one project, they suddenly have another, even better idea that they need to pursue, and the cycle just repeats itself from there. On the other hand, those who use introverted intuition are also described as people who chase after possibilities, just in a different way. Those who use introverted intuition are seen as having a web-like, free-flowing unconscious mind that floats from each idea to the next. Unlike with extroverted intuition, those who use introverted intuition might have a hard time bringing their ideas from the internal world to the outside world, due to the free-flowing nature of ideas in the mind of the person who uses introverted intuition. In their mind, an idea could just float away as fast as it came, making it difficult to hold on to an idea long enough to actually bring it into reality. Now, this cognitive function model is based upon a model proposed by psychoanalyst Carl Jung. In his model, he proposed that one would have a primary function, which would be a person's dominant way of interacting with the world, but they would also have an auxiliary function, or a supporting function, that one would also use to interact with the world. As for the other functions, they were seen as repressed, but were able to rise from time to time as individuals became aware of themselves in a process called individuation. This was about as far as Jung went with this theory, and he never introduced the concept of personality types. In fact, Jung opposed to labeling people as purely one type, due to the fact that human beings are complex and subject to development and change. However, this all changed when Isabel Briggs-Myers, a creator of MBTI, got a hold of cognitive functions. In her view, cognitive functions would also be determined by extroversion and introversion, in which an extroverted person will always have an extroverted dominant function and vice versa. Furthermore, she divided cognitive functions into perceiving and judging categories, where the perceiving functions, sensing and intuition, would explain how people receive and absorb information, whereas the judging functions, thinking and feeling, explain how people make decisions. A person will always have one cognitive function for sensing, intuition, thinking, and feeling, but which functions are extroverted or introverted is determined by whether someone is a judger or a perceiver. If someone is a judger, their judging function will be extroverted, whereas if someone is a perceiver, their perceiving function will be extroverted. Furthermore, whether someone is an introvert or extrovert determines whether their introverted or extroverted function will be dominant. Now, being active in the MBTI community myself, I see a lot of smugness from people who use this specific cognitive function model. People basically have this idea that if you don't understand the cognitive function model, you should not be interacting with others in the MBTI community. Which, I mean, fair enough, because if you don't understand the cognitive function model, going into communities where others are exclusively using the cognitive function model is probably incredibly confusing. But this insistence that everybody should use the cognitive function model above all else is just incredibly silly to me because, bruh, this shit is unnecessarily confusing. Like, you really expect every single person who is casually taking an MBTI test for fun to go out of their way to learn the most convoluted model of personality in history? I mean, I hope I put helpful visuals on the screen because I did not describe that well enough. That's a big problem I have, not even necessarily with the cognitive function model, but with the MBTI community. You are not special because you learned a confusing model of personality that wasn't even created by a psychologist. Like, be serious. But let's not just go after Myers-Briggs for creating a convoluted mess. Carl Jung, you can come get some too. As I previously stated, the cognitive function model was proposed by Carl Jung, a psychoanalyst. A psychoanalyst is a person who follows a psychoanalytic approach to psychology, which has a large focus on the unconscious mind and bringing the unconscious parts of the mind to conscious awareness. Now, let me just preface this by saying one thing. I don't like psychoanalysis. I'm just going to lay my biases out right now, while also attempting to explain why I have come to this point of view. The first reason why I don't care for psychoanalysis is the fact that psychoanalysts did not come to conclusions based on empirical data and testing. Instead, psychoanalysts would occasionally base their theories on case studies, but for the most part, psychoanalysts would base their theories on just their ideas. I mean, they were incredibly intelligent people, don't get me wrong. It's not like they just pulled something out of their ass and called it a theory. However, the fact that they didn't come to conclusions based on research and empirical evidence is the problem for me. I mean, psychology is based on ideas, but for an idea to become more than just an idea, there needs to be some kind of data to back it up. However, the biggest problem for psychoanalysis is that concepts related to the unconscious are not falsifiable. The concept of falsifiability refers to the fact that for a theory to be valid, it needs to be possible to disprove the theory. A basic example of this concept would be if I proposed a theory that all dogs are brown. How would I be able to disprove this theory? This theory is falsifiable because I could simply find a dog that is not brown, and my theory would be observably untrue. Now, how do we do the same thing for concepts related to the unconscious mind? There are many theories relating to what occurs in the unconscious mind of human beings, but how would it be possible to falsify any of them? You can't disprove something that isn't able to be physically observed, and that's one of my biggest issues with MBTI. This is especially evident in functions such as sensing and intuition, which are described as unconscious functions, especially in the case of intuition. Both the cognitive functions of extroverted intuition and introverted intuition supposedly describe how one's unconscious mind functions. The only problem is, how do we know? I mean, we can conduct case studies on people who have been typed to use those functions, but that still doesn't change the fact that there's no way to determine at what point this theory is untrue. I mean, there will always be a fallback built into the core of MBTI in that, well, maybe the people we were asking weren't actually ENFPs, they're just mistyped. So I ask again, when we're talking about MBTI, how do we actually know? Regardless of the origins of MBTI, one of the biggest factors that gets new users to trust MBTI is just how often personality tests seem to get your type correct. I mean, just go on Twitter and you'll see variations of, I've gotten the same result every time I've taken the test. And I'm not poking fun at these people. I think this is a feature of MBTI that can actually make it really engaging. I mean, you have a type that you identify with so much that you keep getting over and over again. That must be your type, right? This is an example of a test that has high reliability, at least for certain people. In psychology, reliability simply refers to the consistency or stability of a measure. It measures whether or not the variable it is supposed to be measuring is always measured in the same way, or in simple terms, whether or not the measure always gives you the same results after being tested many times. In the case of MBTI, people who always get the same result no matter how many times they take the personality test are demonstrating that the measure is reliable, which isn't an incorrect assessment, as the very nature of the personality test is that if you get the same answers every time, you will get the same results. However, this doesn't account for the massive amounts of people who have the opposite experience. There are also many people who talk about how they never get the same results, so that they are always given different results no matter how many times they take the test. So what's going on here? Why are some people able to get extremely reliable results, whereas others couldn't get reliable results to save their lives? Well, the most obvious answer is that if someone is more engaged in taking the test and the answers they are giving, they're going to be more in tune with their emotions and more likely to give an accurate response. However, there is an even bigger problem looming over MBTI, one that can't exactly be resolved by concluding that some people are just more engaged while taking the test than others. In simple terms, is MBTI even measuring what it thinks it's measuring, or what it says it's measuring? This is the concept of validity in psychology. In order for a measure to be considered valid, we need to be sure it measures exactly what it is supposed to be measuring. Examples of the concepts of reliability and validity in pop culture can be seen in the endless amounts of famous group takes BuzzFeed quiz to see which member they actually are videos on YouTube. Chances are at least one member gets an answer that's not actually them, and it's funny and cute and obviously just in good fun. This is because nobody actually thinks that BuzzFeed quizzes are legitimately going to tell you anything about yourself. There is a consensus that they shouldn't be taken too seriously because they don't actually measure what they say they measure. Nobody actually thinks they are going to be told an in-depth analysis of their personality through a BuzzFeed quiz, for example, because nobody thinks BuzzFeed quizzes are actually well equipped to handle this. Therefore, when group members are sitting right in front of you, taking a quiz that is supposed to tell them which group member they are, and they don't even get themselves, this is just one example of the fact that a BuzzFeed quiz is not a valid measure. However, is the test reliable? Well, yes. If you give the same answers every time, you will always get the same results. This is a similar concept to MBTI tests. They're reliable because if you give the same answers every time, you will always get the same results. This is why some people always get the same results when they take MBTI tests. These people are likely either more engaged with the answers they're giving, or their mood simply stays more consistent, allowing them to answer the questions that they are given in the same way every time. However, the problem of validity poses an even bigger question to MBTI tests, which we come back to once again. This is the question of, well, how can we even know? I mean, isn't it difficult to know if questions measuring extroversion are actually measuring extroversion, or if questions measuring intuition are actually measuring intuition? This becomes especially challenging when we consider that there is not one single operational definition that everybody uses when determining what each trait actually measures. This is an issue because in science, operational definitions allow us to be on the same page about what we are actually observing and measuring. I mean, extroversion measures a person's affinity to direct energy outwardly, so that must make someone more extroverted. However, in some tests, sensors are also seen as people who crave new experiences and sensations, which could very much line up with someone being seen as energetic. So what is the discrepancy? Are both traits measuring the same thing? I mean, sensors are practical, but thinkers are rational, which is a synonym of practical. Are these traits measuring the same thing? Are these traits measuring the same thing? The problem is that there are no specific guidelines in the MBTI community outlining precisely what definitions for each trait or cognitive function the community should use, and this has only gotten worse with more and more people dipping their toes into the pool. Everybody has a different idea on what intuition is, what feeling is, what extroverted feeling is, and this only gets worse in communities like Personality Database, where everybody is an absolute nerd on the subject. In these types of communities, not only is there no consensus, but everybody has a different opinion on the matter and is arguing with each other over definitions everybody has rationalized differently in their heads. And it's not anybody's fault that nobody knows what the hell is going on, because it's literally just the truth and nobody knows what the hell is going on. There's no consensus. So how can we even begin trying to validate measures of testing, for which what we are testing for is an invalid measure in and of itself? There are many measures of personality besides MBTI. Most of these measures of personality belong to the various trait approaches of psychology. For trait approaches, they look at individual traits in relation to personality and measure how individuals score in each specific trait independent from the other traits. This is by far the approach to personality psychology with the most research backing it up, and is also the approach that has developed the most scientifically validated and reliable personality measure, the Big Five. However, the typological approach was developed with the idea that personality should instead be measured in terms of different groups. The rationale behind the typological approach is that personality groups may be able to capture personality in ways that standard trait measurements aren't able to. However, do they really? Not only have typological approaches to personality not been shown to predict behavior or life outcomes beyond what can already be predicted by trait measures, but they also introduce their own set of problems into the mix. The most obvious problem typological approaches introduce is the problem of a random cutoff point of scores. Because typological approaches seek to put people in different groups instead of simply recording scores for each specific trait, there needs to be an arbitrary cutoff point where one person is put into one group and one person is put in another. However, this creates issues in the fact that there is no clear point in which, for example, someone stops being extroverted and starts being introverted. There needs to be a cutoff point somewhere, but for most tests, the cutoff is right at 50%. Now, with that in mind, look at these test results and tell me if something seems off to you. What group are each of these people in? Person 1 is put in the introverted group, whereas both person 2 and 3 are in the extroverted group. But why? Person 1 and 2 are closer in scores than person 2 and 3, yet they're put into different groups? Why? Because of a random cutoff point. This becomes even more problematic when we realize that most traits are normally distributed, meaning the majority of scores will sit somewhere around the middle. We can't just take people who have traits 2 points away from each other, say that one person is definitely introverted whereas the other is definitely extroverted. That just doesn't have any real world significance. I mean, in the real world, when people are that close in terms of levels of extroversion, they see themselves as similar. However, in the typological approach, they're supposedly at the opposite end of the spectrum. Now, this issue is in relation to the 4-letter model for the most part, as the cognitive functions model skirts this issue by not using the dichotomy system. However, on the contrary, the cognitive function model is excessively rigid and doesn't allow for much variability in expression of personality. I mean, if you're an ESFJ, you use extroverted feeling, introverted sensing, extroverted intuition, and introverted thinking, all in that order. That's it, end of. However, I genuinely don't see any reason why someone who uses extroverted feeling could never possibly use extroverted thinking, or why a person could not have high levels of both extroverted and introverted sensing. This model just seems far too rigid for a model that can supposedly type every single person in existence. But no, I hear you saying. I've not only been able to type myself, but also everybody I've ever known using this model. How are you saying this model is too rigid, yet it fits every single scenario so perfectly? Well, if you really want to know, I'll tell you. The Barnum Effect is a phenomenon in psychology that refers to the tendency for individuals to accept information such as character assessments or horoscopes as applying specifically to themselves, even when information is vague or general enough to apply to anyone. Now, does this apply to MBTI? Well, have you ever made a decision based on your own logical view of the world? You must be an INTP. Or maybe if you've had a really great idea come to you, but then, oh no, it was only a passing image and now it's gone into your unconscious mind. You must actually be an INFJ. Oh wait, what's that? You have a moral code? Well, fuck me, you're an INFP. Sorry that took so long to type you. The point I'm trying to make is, if you want MBTI types to fit any person in your life, it is absolutely possible to make MBTI types fit any person in your life using both the 4-letter and cognitive function model. Now, I know there is a tendency for people to get incredibly attached to one personality type because, as you know, it just describes them so well. I mean, I guarantee as I've described traits pertaining to each type, there has been at least one person sitting back like, LOL, good try, Gizzo. But that's my type and that doesn't describe us at all. Try again. And to that I say, it is completely in the realm of possibility that I did not describe a particular type as well as I could have. I mean, I'm not an expert in this field, and I'll never pretend that I am. I'm an undergraduate psychology student. However, I do think that there is more to this than just me and my stupid video. People genuinely connect with these personality types, so when faced with a description of their type that doesn't align with who they are, they either disregard it or attempt to explain it away as invalid. This is known as confirmation bias, in which there is a tendency for people to interpret information in a way that confirms pre-existing beliefs and ignore information that doesn't. This is why people who are really into MBTI rarely take personality type descriptions that don't align with who they are as a sign that, maybe that just isn't my personality type. No, it is my personality type and I have all the information I need to prove it. This is a very popular phenomenon in astrology, which thrives off of people taking vague descriptions of their star sign and interpreting it to have more significance to their life than it actually does, in which the description is just vague enough that it can apply to everybody, but it is also vague enough that if maybe one sentence or even one word doesn't align with your vision of yourself, who cares? It's easy to either find a way to make it work or just forget about it. It's not like everything has to match up perfectly in order to be legit. And while MBTI does come across as more scientific than astrology to many people, as we've talked about previously in this video, is it really? That's up to you to decide. Based on what we've talked about, do you think MBTI is more legit than astrology? I actually don't have an answer to this question. I'm curious what other people think, so leave a comment if you want to. But regardless of the answer to this question, we do know that MBTI is not the end-all be-all in personality psychology, and there are issues that should, at the very least, be kept in the back of everyone's mind when engaging with this model of personality. Is it fun? Yes. That's why, despite its issues, it will continue to be my personal favorite way of typing people, and myself, because it's just fun to engage with personality in this way. I mean, sure, the Big Five is more scientifically valid, but does it have a cute avatar that accompanies your results? I don't think so. MBTI is just more engaging. I mean, it's pop psychology at its finest, let's not lie to ourselves. However, do I think MBTI is an unchallengeable scientific theory that we should take at face value? Obviously not. I think it's completely fine and actually preferable to be critical of the content you engage with and the communities you're a part of. Of course, there are still going to be people who disagree with me, like, goddamn extroverted thinkers, not everything needs to be published in a peer-reviewed journal for it to be valid. And I mean, I do agree with that statement, but if you've made it to this point in the video and that's your only takeaway, we can agree to disagree. So yes, that's the end of the video. This is my first YouTube video, so I'm sorry. But if you've made it this far, thank you, that's actually crazy. Hit the like button and subscribe maybe, if you want to. But if nobody's watching this, well, at least we try, Gazelle.